Okay. So, we are very pleased to have here Professor Isidora Stojanovic from the Jean-Nicod Institut in Paris. Isidora is a well-known philosopher for her work on philosophy of language. She has two PhDs actually, one in Paris with François Recanati, and another one from Stanford with John Perry as advisor. And we are very pleased that you're here. So we hope this is the first one of many visits. Yeah?
I very much hope so.
Yeah, and she's going to talk about the same assertion. Yeah?
So let me start by thanking Marco for arranging this talk. I hope it's going to work out okay without the slides, so you have the handout. Two things. If you have any questions, especially clarificatory questions, please interrupt me as I'm talking. No problem. And the second one is that there is a paper version of what I'm going to give as a talk. So actually there are two paper versions. There is the long one, which I hope to deliver today, and it's available from the Jean-Nicod archive. So if you go at the webpage of the Jean-Nicod Institute, so that's the paper called Assertion. And then what happened is that the first half of the paper, which is the negative half, has just come out in Erkenntnis online first, so it's also available through that. So let me try to, maybe I should close the door now?
Yes, it's okay.
So start by telling you what were the motivations for this talk. I've worked on the notion of semantic content and have independently defended the view on which all there is to semantic content is the lexical encoded content. So what comes with the lexical meaning. And then one consequence of that sort of view is that when it comes to indexicals, words like I and he and this and so on, the proposal is that the reference doesn't go into semantic content. So that's something that's quite a departure from what is nowadays the mainstream view in philosophy of language, which is the view defended by David Kaplan, according to which reference of indexicals and demonstratives is part of semantic content. So having that as a background, this line of the project is to also argue that that notion of semantic content is best suited to play the role of the asserted content, or what is said. So if you look at the handout, so the problem is that the slides are not numbered, but on the first page, the third slide gives you a reminder of what is the mainstream picture today. So the mainstream picture that I'll just remind you now is that of David Kaplan, and he held that there are two levels of meaning, what he called character and content. So on that mainstream picture, if I say I'm happy today, there is what he calls character, so it's the lexical encoded meaning, and it's something like the speaker is happy on the day of utterance. And so on this picture, so you take this level of meaning, you as it were apply it to a specific context of utterance, and then you get the second level, which is the level of content. So if I say I'm happy today, according to Kaplan, the content or the proposition expressed is that Isidora is happy on November 17, 2011. If Marco says the same sentence tomorrow, then the character or the meaning, the linguistic meaning is the same, but the content expressed or what is said is that the proposition that Marco is happy on November 18, 2011. So that's the standard picture, and that's actually the picture that I'm going to reject. So what's going to happen today in the talk? So in the first part, I will present problems for this mainstream view, the Kaplanian view, and then I will look at a way on which a Kaplanian might try to answer those problems, and so So for Kaplanian, so there is meaning, and then there is content, and content is what he said. Basically, what I will start by presenting are cases where we intuitively perceive what he said as being the same, even though the Kaplanian picture doesn't predict that the contents are the same. So then the step that the Kaplanian might take is to say, well, sometimes we also perceive what he said as being the same when the character or the linguistic meaning is the same. And then, so the second step there is going to be to say that that solution doesn't work. And so afterwards, what I'm basically going to do is sort of say, well, this is motivation to give up on the Kaplanian picture and maybe look for some other views, and then it will connect to this stuff on semantic contents. I will propose my own view and show how that one handles the cases. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast or no? Okay, so just then again a reminder of the Kaplanian view.
Just one question. Yeah. I didn't get it properly. So, what's wrong with the Kaplan's view? You're going to give the details, I think. But the idea that on Kaplan's view of semantic content, his view of semantic content cannot capture the some cases of identity of content. This is what you mean. And you want a theory that might be able to capture that kind of identity, which is not captured by Kaplan's view.
That's more or less, yeah.
So you want to focus the identity of content cases.
Yeah, so like the cases where we intuitively perceive the expressed content as being.
You mean there's no room in the Kaplan theory for such cases, or?
Well, so we can maybe it will make more sense to talk about that. So for Kaplan, so he has semantics for indexicals, and basically the idea is that the indexicals, what they contribute to semantic content is their reference. So there is a well-identified level of content. The kind of cases that I will bring up are those where when we look at two utterances and we ask ourselves whether they say the same thing, the Kaplanian content isn't the same. So the straightforward Kaplanian view is one that's, so it's problematic for the case. But then you can sort of amend the Kaplanian view and say, well, even if the content isn't the same, there is something else that's the same, and that's what's going to happen. Okay. So it gets tricky because I don't think that the cases I'm going to bring up are really knockdown arguments against the Kaplanian view. But then the question is, what's the best way of pursuing the project, whether it's worthwhile staying within the Kaplanian project and then sort of twisting it around to account for those cases. And then my proposal is going to be to say, well, we have also other reasons not to pursue the Kaplanian project, and let's see what we get with this one. So that's the dialectics. Okay.
So just a small clarification. You're thinking of content being the same along the time, right? You're dealing with.
So we were going to get to cases.
Okay.
So the plan was to start first by reminding you what the Kaplanian view is and what were his motivations for thinking that there are those two levels or two stages, and lots of motivations have to do with what he said. And then actually the first kind of problematic cases brings up the question of time, the sensitivity to time of contents, and then we'll switch to cases of the DC.
Okay.
So we'll come back to it. But so first, because I don't know how familiar all of you are with Kaplanian view, so so the picture that you have on the first page, the one that has little arrows, that's a sort of caricature picture of the Kaplanian view. So this idea that you have a character and that you have a content. So David Kaplan in the demonstratives has several kinds of arguments that are supposed to show that you get those two levels of meaning, character and content. And the number of arguments are related to the notion of what is said, or the content expressed. So there are two motivations that are important for him. One is a case where we have sentences with different meanings, but intuitively we say the same thing. So still on the first page, so the last slide is an example of a case where we have different meanings, but it seems the same content. So Alma says, I'm hungry on May 15 at noon. And then Bruce, pointing at Alma, says, she's hungry. And intuitively, it seems that they're saying the same thing because they're both saying that Alma is hungry at that time. Or the next day, Bruce might say, Alma was hungry yesterday at noon. And so again, we might report them as having said the same thing. We might say, well, that's what she said yesterday too. So that, again, would be a case where even though the sentences have different meanings, like one uses the lexical I, so it means something like the speaker is hungry, the other one uses the she. So there is a level where they seem to share their content. So that's the first sort of motivation that Kaplan had for thinking of content in terms of incorporating the reference of images. The second kind of case for Kaplan would be the one where we have the opposite thing. So we have sentences with the same meaning, but he would like to say that different things are said. So if Alma says, I'm hungry, and Chris says, I'm hungry, so that's the same sentence with the same meaning. So Kaplan wants to say that even though they share the meaning, different contents are expressed because what Alma is saying is something about her, namely the proposition that Alma is hungry, and what Chris is saying is about him, that Chris is hungry. And here you have a quote from Kaplan, so now we're on the second page. So he writes, what is said in using a given lexical in different contexts may be different. Thus, if I say today I was insulted yesterday and you utter the same words tomorrow, what is said is different. There are possible circumstances in which what I said would be true, but what you said would be false. Thus, we say different things. And so the next slide is just to point out that actually, so both of those insights sort of go back to Frege, and there are two quotes from Frege. One is the sentence I'm called expresses a different thought in the mouth of one person from what it expresses in the mouth of another. So if you think of thought as something that's content, so that would go with this motivation. And then the second quote is, it is not necessary that the person who feels called should himself give utterance to the thought that he feels called. Another person can do this by using a name to designate the one who feels called. So this second quote is something that matches the first case that we saw. So one person says, I am called, and then the other one uses the name to express that the other is called. So in a way, both of those motivations are going back to Frege. So that's so much about Kaplan.
It seems to me that there's a big difference between Frege and Kaplan, is the very nature of this content. Because for Frege, the metaphysics is different. For Frege, it's a Fregean proposition, what we call Fregean proposition, with mode of presentation, maybe of the reference. And and the reference is not part of the proposition expressed.
Yeah, sure. No, I wasn't
you don't want
to
to
suggest that the Kaplanian view is the same as the Fregean view. Of course, there are
the motivation is the same.
But just like the observation that there is something about indexicals that, when it comes to expressing the same thought, so this kind of case where you have
To me, it makes all the difference. You say if what is encoded is a singular proposition, with the referent as a proper constituent of the proposition. If you said no, it's not the single proposition. It's something like which is composed of modes of presentation, and the reference is not part of it.
Yeah.
You mean?
I think that's really like at least at this stage it's not something that's actually even relevant. So whether whether you think of the Coplanian view as including like the referent itself or including like what is called an individual concept or something that's not the referent but is somehow in a way singled out, well, closely linked to the referent, is not really at issue here. So, and then like if you just look at the quote that they gave from Kaplan, so that one doesn't say anything about what the proposition is like, whether it's a singular proposition or and so on. So all that's important is for him to say that we express different, we say different things when one says I'm hungry and the other person also says that.
In your example, the Freudian thought would be the semantic content or the expressive content, what's said?
So for Kaplan, both semantic content and expressive content are the same.
But in your view, what is said is more the Freudian thought. The state of affairs, the reality, what is going on. If there is a difference between semantic content and expressive content, the expressive content will be the Freudian thought, the state of affairs, the reality, what's being represented.
I think that like at this stage we can just still keep assuming that semantic content is the expressive.
Not always.
Well, but then, we'll maybe go back to that. I mean, from what we've said so far, there is no reason to think that they will diverge.
So far you're making very general, but I mean, basically,
so far
they're
I'm just like
not going down
you,
to the metaphysics.
We won't get to any metaphysics if you're here for
No, I doubt it.
If you're here for the metaphysics of contents, you might be at the wrong place. Now we'll actually stay very unmetaphysical. No, so what's happened this far, and maybe I should keep track of time, is that I've just presented what is the mainstream view today. So basically the mainstream view is the one that's inherited from Kaplan, and one of the motivations is to say, well, one of the reasons why we need precisely to have two levels of meanings is that one level is going to be to correspond to the lexically encoded content, so something that sort of remains the same whoever speaks and whenever the sentence is used, so that's the character. But we need another level of meaning. Why? Because the first level doesn't account for what is said, right? And so the two cases that Kaplan brings out are, one is so different meanings, but we say the same thing. So that's like, I'm hungry said by Alma, and she's hungry said by her. And then the same sentence meaning, but different contents. Namely, when two people say, I'm hungry, so Kaplan says they express different content. Okay, now on to problems. So the first one is something that was already brought up early by people like David Lewis and Richard Feldman, where just after, in the 80s, early 80s. So basically what they pointed out is that the case, like the one that you have on the second slide, on the second page, first slide, where two people say, I'm hungry. So that sort of case seems to be as much of a problem for Kaplan than a motivation for it. So why? Well, part of the reason is that, so if you, so now on the slides, we've shifted to a different example, but it's to make the same point. So suppose that Alma says on November 4th, where are we? No, sorry, I'm just,
Page 2.
I'm not following the slide. So we'll come back to page 2 later, but go to page 3, actually, right now. So, I think we might just, for the time being, sort of put aside what's on page 2 and come back to it later. But, so on page 3, if you have Alma who says, I'm hungry, and then Chris says also, I'm hungry, and someone reports Alma said that too. So the fact are that, as it stands, that sort of report is ambiguous because in one context you can interpret it as reporting Alma to have said that Chris is hungry, but in an appropriate context, so for instance if it's assumed that Alma doesn't even know who Chris is, so the reading that you get is the one on which Alma said I'm hungry. So and you might report both people as having said the same thing, namely they both said that they were hungry. So that there is the sense of same saying where precisely the linguistic meaning or the character in Albanian terms is what's relevant for the same saying. Is it clear enough? So the reason why I'm using this term, they say assertion, is that, so the term they say comes from David Lewis, from his paper Attitudes, the Dicta and they say. So they say is echoes, so there was this distinction between the Dicta and the re, and he introduced this term they say to characterize thoughts that we have about ourselves. And nowadays in the literature, when people talk about they say attitudes or they say, it's attitudes that one has about oneself. So that kind of discussion goes up to Castaneda and Perry and Lewis. And what's been noted is that in general, so the attitudes that we have about ourselves have a special status, and that so if two people quote think of themselves, they say that they are hungry. There is also not just this, an important similarity in what they think, but also in how they act, because they are going to react in a certain way, like go for food and so on. So that's the level that in philosophy of mind what people try to capture by talking of these attitudes. And so in a way what I'm doing here is showing that when it comes to assertion, there is also something interesting about asserting things about ourselves. So they say basic competences. Now, so coming back to this example, so two people who say I'm hungry, and you have a report that they said the same thing. As I mentioned, there is no ambiguity in the report. So in the paper, what I'm using to discriminate the two readings is a terminology that comes actually from syntax of sloppy and strict reading. So you're on the third page, the second slide gives you an example from that ambiguity with verb phrase ellipsis. So if Chris says, I love my wife, and Alma says, so does Bruce, is ambiguous. On the strict reading, Bruce loves Chris's wife, and on the sloppy reading, Bruce loves his own wife. So then, like, I'll be talking of the strict sloppy ambiguity for things like Alma said that too. So if Chris says, I'm hungry, and you report Alma said that too, on the sloppy reading, what Alma said is, I'm hungry. And on the strict reading, what Alma said is, Chris is hungry, or he is hungry, or the person next to me is coming. So, so that's our first problem for the companion cue, namely that in the cases where two people say I'm hungry, it's not obviously clear that they are saying different things, because on some understandings they'll be saying different things, whereas on other understandings they're saying the same thing.
So, excuse
yeah.
me. Why is that a problem? Because there's just an ambiguity here. Why is this a problem? I mean, Kaplan would say if you concentrate on the character, they are saying the same thing. If you concentrate on the content, they are not saying the same thing.
It's pre-semantics. It's pre-semantics.
What?
It's pre-semantics in semantical work.
Yeah. Why should that be a problem?
Okay. So that's precisely the kind of reply that I'm now going to show that it doesn't work.
Okay.
But it's nice that you brought it up. So initially it is a problem just in the sense that so for Kaplan what he said is the content. So then he has to somehow discard the sloppy reading as being a non-literal report. So by itself it might be a problem to say, like, well, when you say Alma said that too, on the sloppy reading you are just somehow non-literally reporting what she said, and on the strict reading you are literally reporting what he said, and so he has this analogy. But there is something more serious about that problem. So now what Marco has suggested as the obvious reply on the behalf of the Kaplanian is to say, well, when we report what is said, sometimes we report it because the characters are the same. So if the characters are the same, that sort of warrants the intuition that the two people are saying the same. And I will try to show that that sort of solution doesn't work. So the next two cases are going to be those where, so the idea is to show that it's neither necessary nor sufficient that the characters be the same for us to report same saying in cases where the contents are not the same either. So we're looking at cases where Kaplanian contents are not the same. And then, so what we will first see is that we can have cases of same saying where the intuition of same saying is as robust as what we've just seen, but the characters are not the same, which shows that then Kaplan has to say something else. And then the second sort of cases will be the converse, so cases where the contents are not the same and the characters are the same, but you don't report what is said as being the same. So it shows what we will see is an asymmetry actually between the use of the first person and other cases. Okay, so first sort of case. So we are still on page 3, so it's slide number 5, so bottom one in the center. So we have Bruce, who says, I really like Professor Chang's class on Montague. At some point he's talking to Chris, so Bruce says, I really like Chang's class on Montague. On some other occasion, Chris is talking to Alma, and he's talking to her actually during the class. And Alma says, I really like this class. And Chris says, oh, well, that's what Bruce said too. Based on Bruce's having said, I really like Jen's class in Montague. And so here again, so what we have is, again, an ambiguity. So Alma just says, I really like this class, and you report that's what Bruce said too. On the stopping reading, Bruce said that he liked this class, and on the strict reading, he said that Alma liked this class. But the way in which he said that he liked the class doesn't need to use the same character as the sentence that you're reporting on, because he could have said, I really like Chan's class on Montague, or I really like the class that we are just coming out now, and that sort of stuff. So what that shows is that, so you have same saying, but the characters are not the same because one has this class, the other one has a description for the class. So the relevant level of same saying has to be still something else. So the sort of immediate solution that you outlined on Kaplan's behalf doesn't work, and you need to say something more. So we can, in the discussion, come back to the question whether what would be the other options on the Kaplan behalf, but at least the first immediate option to say, well, that's just an ambiguity because in some cases what's relevant is the character, in other cases what's relevant is the content, doesn't account for the case that we have here.
So in this case, the Bruce and Alma. This case here is a case where you have mixed, character and content in one single package, right? So
yes,
she said the same.
It's like a hybrid thing.
He said that too, so you cannot point at the character because you're getting wrong. You cannot point at the content because you're getting wrong as well. Okay.
That's it. Now the second sort of problem is to say, well, if in the case of I'm hungry, really it's only just the sameness of character that warrants our capacity of reporting the same, reporting the same saying and seeing the things as being this, and perceiving the two utterances as saying the same thing, then it should work in general. So whenever we have sentences with the same character, we would expect to have that sort of ambiguity. But actually, that's not what we found. And so the first example is just to compare, to look at the minimal pair, one that has the first person pronoun and the other one that uses the second person pronoun. So that's still on page 3, the last slide. So Alma says, I'm a fool. Bruce says, I'm a fool. Chris says, Alma said that too. The report is ambiguous. But now look at what you get when you replace I by you. So Professor Chang says to Alma, you are a fool. And then Chris says to Bruce, you are a fool. By the way, Professor Chang said that too. Now, and I hope that you share those intuitions. When Chris says Professor Chang said that too, he's not speaking truly based on Chang saying to Alma that she's a fool. There is no ambiguity in Professor Chang saying that too, but the dominant reading, which is that Professor Chang said that Bruce is a fool. So the dissymmetry is that when we have I, there is ambiguity, but when we have you, and the reporter doesn't make it explicit that the address you was someone else, there is no ambiguity. And so the reason why that's a problem for Kaplan is that if it's only the sameness of character that's enough to report some saying, we would expect ambiguity. So if you go now to page 4, so that's the case where you have a minimal pair between the first person pronoun and the third person pronoun, and there it's even more obvious. So if Chang is pointing at Alma and she says she's a fool, and Chris is pointing at this other woman, let's call her Daisy, and he says she's a fool, and you say, oh, Professor Chang said that too. Again, we don't get the ambiguity, we only get one reading, namely that Professor Chang said that Daisy was the woman that Chris is talking about. And so again, what the Kaplanian would need to do is say something more as to why we get this distinction. Now, questions at this stage? So the next section number 4, entitled "How Many Senses of What Is Said." So the idea here is that, and some people have like sort of taken that line, they would say, well look, when you look at David Kaplan's work, he's not really interested about our intuitions about what he said, and there is a good reason why. That's because when we report what he said, it gets so messy and it's all pragmatics, and so we shouldn't even think about identifying semantic content with what he said, because semantic content is semantically serious, but what he said is like pragmatics and gets messy, and so there's people who would think like in those lines would then point to cases where you report to people as saying the same thing and very naturally, but there is not that much in common in the semantics. So if you look at the example on page 3, so you might imagine that Bruce is talking to Alma about the classes that she likes or dislikes, and he asks, and how is Professor Blanchette's class? And she says, I don't think I've ever been in such a boring class. And then on the next occasion, he talks to Daisy and says, how's Blanchette's class? And she says, that class is a sheer waste of time. Then so Bruce may say, well, that's what Alma said too. Even though, what Alma said is, I don't think I've ever been in such a boring class, so something that really has a different meaning and a different content. Whereas Daisy said that class is a sheer waste of time, but it seems that it's fine to report that they said exactly the same thing, because they both said something negative about Blanchette's class, implicating that it's a boring class. So then, like if you look at the range of cases of reports of what he said that seem to that we would have here, then the idea would be to say, well, the cases that I'm bringing with this assertion, it's not really much of a surprise, because it's just another garden variety of many senses of what he said. So we should just all sort of drop the idea that there is an interesting relationship between semantic content and what he said, and think that there are lots of things said, or it depends on how you want to catch up with it. Now, I don't think that that's a good way of drawing, so I don't really have this on the slides, but basically the reason why I don't think that the cases of this assertion are just another garden variety, as it were, of those implication senses of what he said, is that you get interesting differences between reports of same saying in this assertion and reports that we have, like in this case, where the two persons are merely implicating the same thing. So if you look at one of our main cases, so now but on the third page, the first one, the problem with this assertion. So Alma says, I'm hungry, and Chris says, I'm hungry. Bruce replies to Chris, Alma said that too. And you say, oh no, she didn't quite say that. She only said that she's hungry. But let me actually start with the implication case. So look at the case that we've just seen. So Alma says, I don't think I've ever been in such a boring class. Daisy says, that class is a sheer waste of time. And then Bruce says, that's what Alma said too. Someone might reply to Bruce, oh no, Alma didn't quite say that. All that she said is that she has never been in such a boring class. That didn't mean that it's a waste of time. And then typically Bruce will sort of retract and say, well, I meant that, she said, she implicated that the class was boring or something of the sort. So the person wouldn't say, oh, no, yes, that's exactly what she said, but would sort of qualify the report by saying, okay, it's not what she said, but that's pretty much what she meant. Now, if you look at this sort of strategy in which you might want to challenge a reporter in the case of this assertion. So Chris says, I'm hungry. You say, So Bruce says, Alma said that too. And now you say to Bruce, oh no, that's not what she said. She said that she is hungry. So that becomes very weird, because basically what's happening is that you're just not disambiguating the report right. And we can again compare that with the case of a phrasal ellipsis. So if Chris says, I love my wife, Alma says, so does Bruce, and you say, oh no, he doesn't, he loves his own wife. It's weird because, I mean, the reason why it's weird is that if the speaker intended the sloppy reading, the challenger, as it were, is just sort of denying the other reading to confirm the sloppy reading. And that's what we have with this assertion. So sort of to sum up, when we have the implication sense of what is said where the two people are reporting the same saying, and you get to the stage of saying, well, that's not exactly what she said, so the reporter is going to say, well, okay, but she said something similar, whereas where we have this assertion, and then you say that's what she said, and you say, oh no, that's not exactly what she said. The reporter sort of says, well, no, that's exactly like what I was saying, you've disambiguated my report incorrectly. Which suggests that in the Dese case, the reports of same saying are really the literal reports. That the ambiguity is a genuine ambiguity and not just a loose sense of saying versus a straight sense of saying. So this sort of ends the first half of the problems for the companion account. I skipped the questions about time sensitivity. Shall I go back to those or sort of go back to...
It's entirely up to you.
So basically we can just look at that very quickly. So that was, where was that one? That was on the second page. So the section that starts problems for the companion account, time neutrality, and this assertion. So there is on the second page the example on the bottom to the left. We have Alma who on the 14th of November says, I'm hoping to turn my dissertation into a book. And several days later, on November 17th, Chris, talking about Alma, says, well, or Chris simply says, Alma is hoping to turn her dissertation into a book. And you report, oh, that's what she said too. Now, if you look at that sort of case, so here the report is very natural and true, but it is also a problem for a version of the companion account on which the contents expressed don't vary in truth value with time. So there is, well, for those of you who know the demonstratives, there is a mismatch between Kaplan's formal account because their contents are actually things that can get different truth values with respect to different times, but the standard view and Kaplan in the informal part thinks of contents as propositions, things that if true are true once for all, and if false are false once for all, and are not true at some times and false at others. But if you think of contents as eternal propositions, then when Alma says on a certain day, I'm hoping to turn my dissertation into a book, she's actually expressing a different content than the one that Chris, 2 days later, expresses by saying Alma is hoping to turn her dissertation into a book. But in those cases, it's very natural to perceive the content expressed as being the same. So that's just adds another sort of problems for the companion. Okay. So this closes the problems for the view. And what I would like to do now is to give you my favorite solution, which connects to the stuff about semantic content that I mentioned in the beginning. Okay, so the positive part of the talk. So it starts on page 4, section called Towards a Solution. And so if you look at the slide, it begins by my proposal. So the proposal is to say that what is said is what I would also like to think of as being the semantic content in this sense that I introduced it in the beginning, namely something that includes at most the lexically encoded meaning, but doesn't include any contextually specified information. So then the best way of modeling such contents, I think, is by taking them to be not propositions, but rather functions from sequences of parameters to truth values. So maybe a good way of thinking about that is, and because I've just mentioned the issues about time neutrality, so when you look at time, at time sensitivity, some people think that we have what they call temporal propositions, namely things, contents that can be true at some times and false at others. So then like a sentence like Isidora is sitting, if it expressed as a temporal proposition, it's true at this time and is false now at this time, and then it becomes true and so on. So that would be a temporal proposition, and the way you model it is that it's a content that takes a truth value at the possible world and at the time. And the suggestion here is that when it comes to indexicals, well, we just have more parameters relative to which contents are sensitive, namely they take their truth value also relative to individuals. So if I say I'm sitting, that evaluated at me now gets the value true, but evaluated at some person who is standing gets the value false. So then you get the contents that are not propositions in the traditional sense, but rather modeled by functions from sequences of parameters to truth values. And the reference of pronouns are not part of those contents, but they are things at which the contents are evaluated for a truth value. Now, you take this notion of content and you say that's also what is said, or the asserted content. So then what happens is that if you are asserting something that only gets a truth value with respect to an individual, typically you don't assert that just simpliciter, but you also assert it about something or someone. So then, so first tenet of the proposal, what is said is semantic content in this very meager, minimal sense, sub-propositional sense. When you assert such a content, there is not just the asserting the content, but also asserting it about something or someone that you're talking about. And then the third step in the proposal is going to say when we report same saying, simpliciter, actually reports sort of mix together the content asserted and those other parameters that are relevant to truth value but are not part of the asserted content. So those are the three components of the view. And so the third component then develops what happens when we report same saying. So if you go to the next page, page 5, yes. So page 5, the last page, the slide that's on the top left says my proposal continued. So as I just said, so it suggests that when we look at intuitions about what is said, they are somehow derivative upon our practices of reporting what is said, and then there is a relative, well, not really formal, but sort of, formally laid down proposal about reports of same saying. So when we report utterances saying the same thing. So what the proposal says, Ralph, is, well, it's okay to report two utterances as saying the same thing if they express the same semantic content. And one of the following clauses obtained. So there is a list of various clauses. The first one is that the two speakers are self-asserting that content, so they are asserting the content about themselves, or else one is self-asserts it and the other speaker asserts it about the same speaker. Or thirdly, they both assert it about the same speaker. And then there are two clauses that sort of say that, when the reporter makes it explicit what the contents were asserted about, then you can also report something. So I think the best way to see how that works is to actually go back to the cases that we've looked at. So, but those that were motivation for companion view and those that were a problem for companion views, and sort of explain how then you get the right predictions, which is what I suggested we do now. So before I do that, is it sort of clear what the notion of semantic content we have? Maybe I wasn't explicit enough, but basically the idea is that if you have a sentence, just abstract on all the indexicals that you get from a sentence, so you're going to have something that's going to have an argument at the place. So if you have I am hungry, the content is something that takes as an argument a sequence having a time, a world, and an individual, and returns truth value true if the individual is hungry at the time and in the world, and false if the individual is not hungry at the time and in the world. If you have she is hungry, it's going to be the same content. So something that takes an individual, a time, a world, returns true if the individual is hungry at that world, false if you have she likes him, the content is going to ask not just for one individual, but for two individuals, so it takes